if it's truly going to be liftoff this offseason for the Orioles, they may have to take a look at bringing in a big-time bat and probably one of the 4 big shortstops on the market. But today, let's figure out which of those 4 shortstops is the best fit for the Orioles. That's all coming up on this Free Agent Friday episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, November 18th, 2022, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at the 4 big free agent shortstops who are out there in free agency. Trea Turner, Dansby Swanson, Carlos Correa, and Xander Bogaerts. Now, the Orioles could perfectly well sign one of these 4 guys, put them at short, second, or third, put them in the middle of that order, and begin the liftoff sequence this offseason. And it makes sense for the Orioles to go after one of these guys because even though they've got a lot of middle infield prospects ready to go, or even in the big leagues, guys like Gunnar Henderson, this player would help the team. It's fine if they move to second base or third base when Gunnar takes over short or whatever it may be. Even if they DH some, that's fine, but they will help the Orioles win baseball games, and they need a star in this lineup. One of these 4 guys could be that guy. So let's just assume for a second the Orioles are going to pursue one of these 4 shortstops. Today, we try to answer the question, which one fits the best for the Orioles? I'll run down each category of these players, rank them, and then at the end, come to a conclusion who would fit the Orioles best. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by betonline.net. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And before we get started, just want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast listening platforms. If you could leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen, that would be fantastic. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. We thank you so much for tuning in all season and all off season as we continue to go here 5 days a week. But let's jump right into it. The 4 big shortstops who are out there in free agency this year. You got Trea Turner, coming off a great career with the Nats and the Dodgers so far. You got Dansby Swanson, who spent all his big league time with the Braves. Carlos Correa, who was with the Astros for a long time, then spent 1 year with the Twins. And then Xander Bogaerts, who has been a star with the Boston Red Sox. All 4 of them play shortstop. All 4 of them are bona fide studs, legitimate all-stars, and all 4 are free agents at the same time. And all 4 certainly are going to command long-term deals worth well over $100 million in total. So the Orioles may not be players for any of these 4 guys. There's certainly a good chance that all 4 of them sign elsewhere and do not sign in Baltimore. But I think there's a chance the O's look at each of these guys and try and bring in one of these big-name shortstops this offseason. But even if you don't think the Orioles should bring in one of these guys, just take a step back and imagine a world where they are aggressively pursuing all 4 of these free agents. So coming up today on a Free Agent Friday episode of the podcast, our first of many coming up this offseason, we're going to look at all 4 guys. Going to compare them, many different categories, and come to a conclusion. If the O's are to pursue all 4, which shortstop fits the best? So let's start with the offense category, because that's what the Orioles are looking for the most if they're going to bring in one of these 4 guys. Because if they're just focused on defense, they're not going to add a shortstop. Jorge Mateo should have won the Gold Glove at shortstop. He won the Fielding Bible Award for the best defensive shortstop in all of baseball this year. The Orioles have Gunnar Henderson as their other option, who is elite defensively, and Ramon Arias. Oh, right. He won the Gold Glove at third base. He can also play some shortstop. They've also got Joey Ortiz waiting in the wings in AAA. They've got plenty of options there. So let's start with the offense, because Jorge Mateo was not good offensively, and that is where they are lacking. So let's start with power. Now you look at these 4 guys. You got Trea Turner, hit 21 home runs this year, slugged .466 with a 169 ISO power. Dansby Swanson was actually the leader in home runs with 25 this year, although not a lot of doubles and triples. so he slugged just 447. Then you had Carlos Correa with 22 homers and a 467 slugging percentage, a 176 ISO power. And Xander Bogaerts kind of brought it up the rear with just 15 homers and a 456 slugging percentage this year. He saw a significant power drop. He'd been, you could pencil him in for 20 plus homers every year. And even playing at Fenway, he hit only 15 this season. So if you're looking at these four guys, yes, Swanson was the leader in home runs with 25, but I'm going to give the edge to Carlos Correa. Even though his 22 homers was second, his 462 slugging and his 176 ISO power both led this group, and the 22 homers being second is close enough to give him the lead. Of course, he was more of a 30-homer guy even in Houston, and power was down a little bit across baseball this year. I will give the edge to Carlos Correa in power. Let's go to contact in terms of, how well guys are putting the ball in play and getting base hits. Xander Bogaerts led the way with batting average with a 307 average and also a 76.9% contact rate. That is, he hit or made contact with about 77% of the pitches that he swung at this year. Then there's Carlos Correa, who had a 291 average this season, about an 80% contact rate. Then you have Trea Turner, had a 298 average with a 75% contact rate. And then Dansby Swanson really brought it up the rear, 277 average and just a 72% contact rate this season. And I think you got to give this category to Xander Bogaerts. His 307 average led all four of these shortstops. He was the only guy to hit over 300 this year. And although the 77% contact rate wasn't quite what Correa was at 80%, with Bogaerts, he just puts the ball in play so much and just gets so many annoying singles and doubles. And Bogaerts is really good at hitting pitches that are outside the strike zone and still getting base hits. The best of these four guys on that. I'm going to give him the edge in the contact realm. Now let's head to walks, because the Orioles, we know how big they are on swing decisions. Who's going to walk the most and just get on base? Trea Turner, 343 on base percentage, but just a 6.4 walk rate, the lowest of these four guys. Then you've got Dansby Swanson, his 329 on base percentage, the lowest of these guys, just a 7% walk rate. Then you got Carlos Correa, a 366 on base with a 10.3% walk rate. And Xander Bogaerts with a 377 on base percentage, the best of all four guys. And he has a 9.0% walk rate. So it's nice that Bogaerts has the best on base at 377, but he also has the best average at 307. I'm actually going to give the nod here to Carlos Correa. 366 on base is easily the second best, and a 10.3% walk rate. Once you get over 10%, you're looking at the guys who are really known for getting on base and taking pitches. And for him to be at 10.3, I'll give the edge to Carlos Correa in this category. Then we flip to kind of the other side of the strikeout realm. Who is swinging and missing the most and, can put their team at a disadvantage at times. Trea Turner with an 18.5% strikeout rate, which isn't too bad, but a 36.4% chase rate is by far the highest of these four players. That means he swings at over 36% of the pitches that he sees that are outside the strike zone. Then you have Dansby Swanson, a 26.1% strikeout rate, is far and away the highest strikeout rate of any of these four players that he had this year. Also a 31% chase rate. Then you have Carlos Correa, a 20.5% strikeout rate and a 31% chase rate. And then you have Xander Bogaerts, an 18.7% strikeout rate and a 32% chase rate. Now, this was close. We had Turner with the lowest K rate. You had Correa with the lowest chase rate. But I'm actually going to give the edge to Xander Bogaerts here in the strikeout realm. A 32% chase rate. Yeah, it's still higher than some of the other guys in here, higher than Correa and higher than Dansby Swanson. But because his strikeout rate is basically the lowest at 18.7%, and he's able to, still make contact with those balls he does chase out of the zone, I'll give Bogaerts the edge in terms of the strikeout. So you look at kind of the four offensive categories there, 2 to Xander Bogaerts and 2 to Carlos Correa. And then let's go to StatCast. Let's dig a little deeper offensively, maybe try to break the tie here. Trea Turner, 41% hard hit rate on the year and an 88.9 mile per hour average exit velocity. Then you've got Dansby Swanson, a 46% hard hit rate, led all of these players this year, and a 90.2 mile per hour exit velocity on average. Carlos Correa had about a 45% hard hit rate 89.9 miles per hour exit velocity on average on the year. And Xander Bogaerts did not look good in either of these categories. Just a 39.5% hard hit rate and just 88 miles per hour for Bogaerts on his average exit velo. That gives the edge to Dansby Swanson. Led all four of these guys in both hard hit rate and average exit velocity this year. So he wasn't always rewarded because he did have the lowest average among these guys, but you can kind of see why he led all four of these players in home runs with 25, because he just hit the ball hardest out of all of these guys. So one check to Dansby Swanson offensively. So still kind of close because nobody won the most categories. Overall this year, though, Carlos Correa did have the best offensive stats. His .834 OPS and his .140 WRC plus in the 2022 season both led all four of these players. You had Turner with an .809 OPS, a .128 WRC plus, Swanson with a .776 OPS, just a .116 WRC plus, and then Xander Bogaerts an .833 OPS and a .134 WRC plus also had a great season. So the edge in total offensively, I'm going to give it to Carlos Correa. I'll rank him first in total offense, total hitting. I'll put Xander Bogaerts second. And honestly, when you look at the year, it's pretty neck and neck between Swanson and Trea Turner, but I'll give the edge to Turner third and then Swanson fourth offensively. But hitting is not the only thing these guys do. If the Orioles are going to sign them to long-term deals, they're going to play defense as well. They're going to run the bases. And it's going to matter, how much money the Orioles have to pay these guys as well, plus how old they're going to be at both the beginning and the end of their contract. So coming up next, we'll look at all of those extra factors as well that would go into the Orioles dishing out some of these big-time free agent deals. But first, got to tell you about betonline.net, which is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball. Of course, you got college football, you got the NFL, college basketball has started, you got the NBA, the NHL is going, and soccer. We're just a couple days away from the start of the World Cup in 2022, and all the lines, all the odds, everything you need for every game is over at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, I hope you do. If you're listening to this one, you can find others like it at BetOnline as well. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. That's BetOnline, where the game starts. So we're taking a look at the four big shortstops available in free agency this offseason. Trea Turner, Dansby Swanson, Carlos Correa, and Xander Bogaerts. The Orioles could be going after any of these four guys, and we're trying to figure out which one would fit the Orioles best. So we went through all the offensive categories and decided Carlos Correa looking best offensively, followed by Bogaerts, then Turner, and then Swanson. But let's get to some of the other categories: defense, speed, the contract, their age, just their overall ability. And let's start on the defensive side, because to be quite honest, there's only really one of these four shortstops that's really standing out offensive or defensively, I should say, at this point. And that's Dansby Swanson with 9 defensive runs saved and 20 outs above average at shortstop this season in Atlanta. He was far and away leading this category for all four of these guys. You had Xander Bogaerts, 4 defensive runs saved, 5 outs above average. Carlos Correa, 3 defensive runs saved, -3 outs above average. And then Trea Turner was the worst of them, -1 defensive run saved and 0 outs above average. Easily, the point here goes to Dansby Swanson, far and away the best defender of these four shortstops. And that will come into play, for the Orioles. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see if they sign one of these guys. Would they immediately put him at second base? Maybe play Gunnar Henderson at third and keep Jorge Mateo at short? Would they move Henderson to shortstop, put one of these guys at third or second? Or would they put this guy immediately at short, put Henderson at third, and do Arias/Mateo/ maybe Westberg soon at second base? And then, as the, one of these free agents starts to age, they get moved to either second or third. It's definitely, a decision the Orioles would have, but I think that's a decision you make after you have signed one of these guys and had a couple of great seasons. Let's go to speed. I think the easy pick, of course, is Trea Turner, who continues to be the fastest player in baseball, challenged by Jorge Mateo and by Bobby Witt Jr. But Trea Turner, 30.3 feet per second on his speed this year. That's by far the best of these four guys. Then you got Dansby Swanson at 28.4, Xander Bogaerts at 27.9, and Correa 27.1. Actually pretty slow among shortstops, Carlos Correa, Bogaerts as well. But Trea Turner, the easy pick for speed. He gets his first category, actually, that he has won right here. Then we go to the contract, the financials. How much the Orioles are going to have to spend to get these guys? Now, we're going to go by the MLB trade rumors projections. They put out a projection article for their top 53 agents, predicting where they'll land, what team they'll sign with, and for how many years and how much money. So let's start with Trea Turner. MLB trade rumors predicting him to get an 8-year contract worth $268 million. That would be $33.5 million per year. Interesting because we've kind of put him behind some of the other players, at least when you look at the 2022 season. Then there's Dansby Swanson. He would be the cheapest option of the four. MLB trade rumors predicting 7 years for $154 million. That's just $22 million per year. Then there's Carlos Correa, the prediction from MLB.tr, 9 years. They predicted him to get the longest contract for $288 million. That's $32 million per year, just a little bit less on the average annual value behind Turner. And then Xander Bogaerts, they kind of have him right in the middle. 7 years, $189 million, which would give him $27 million per year. So in terms of per year value from top to bottom, or per year money paid, it would go Turner most expensive, then Correa, then Bogaerts, and then Swanson. But if you're looking at total money they have predicted, it would go Correa, then Turner, then Bogaerts, then Swanson. And when you look at their age, it does make a little bit of sense why they think Turner will get more money per year, but Correa would get the longer deal with the most total money. Trea Turner is 29 years old at the moment. He'll be 37 in June of the final year of his contract. If he does sign an 8-year deal, you would have to think the speed would start to go away at some point as he got into his mid-30s. Dansby Swanson right now is 28 years old. He would be 35 during the final year of that deal if he signed that 7-year, $154 million contract. Carlos Correa is actually the youngest of these guys. He's also 28. He would be just 36 in the final year if he signed a 9-year contract, which they are predicting. And then Xander Bogaerts is the oldest of these four guys. He's the only guy who has turned 30 already. He is 30 years old and would be 36 in the final season if he did sign a 7-year free agent contract. So that's how you kind of look at it with age. Again, youngest in the final year of the contract, you would go with Dansby Swanson. But all things considered, if you're giving Correa a 9-year contract and he's still only 36 at the end, that's probably the best value in terms of length and age at this point. And then when you try to just combine all the players, I mean, you do have to look at injury history as well. None of these four guys has like crazy, terrible injury history where they're missing, a bunch of games. They've each had injuries in their past. Don't get me wrong. All four of these guys have been nicked up and hurt and missed some significant time in certain seasons, but nobody I would call like super injury prone out of the four. So I don't think it's a big thing that you would look at. But in terms of WAR in 2022, according to Fangraphs, they did have Dansby Swanson as the best player. A lot of that was because his defense was so good, but they had him at 6.4 wins above replacement. Trea Turner right behind him at 6.3, then Xander Bogaerts at 6.1, and Carlos Correa, because the defense was down, he was only down at 4.4, rounding out the group. But if you look back at the history of these guys' careers, because it's not like these guys are rookies. I mean, they've each been in the big leagues for, parts of 7 seasons. They've got some numbers behind them. Now, I wanted to do kind of WAR history to take a look at what they average per year, but some guys, came up in the middle of season. Some guys missed some chunks. So I only included years in which the guys played at least 100 games. And so if you average out the WAR from every year they played at least 100 games, it was anywhere from 4 to 6 seasons for each of these guys where they played at least 100 games. Dansby Swanson's at just 2.6 WAR. You got to remember, Swanson had an incredible 2022 season, but he was kind of just a league average hitter and a plus defender at shortstop before this season. This was really his first really good year. Then you have Xander Bogaerts at 4.1 WAR. That's because early in his career, the defense was really bad and the offense was just, pretty good. Then the offense got better and the defense at least got near average, but that's why he's down at 4.1. Then you have Carlos Correa at 4.6 average WAR. And then Trea Turner is by far the top guy just because he hasn't played as many full seasons, but a 5.6 average WAR for him in years where he's played at least 100 games. Pretty impressive. And for Turner, he had a 6.8 WAR in 2021, followed up with a 6.3 WAR in 2022. Even though he has some defensive issues where he might be the worst shortstop out of these guys, he's got a bunch of speed, elite speed, I would trust him if you moved him over to second base defensively. He's also shown, even though he was really bad out there, that he has a history playing the outfield. And he's had the best two combined. If you combine 21 and 22, he's maybe had the best combination of the last two seasons. So basically, look at all of this data, all these numbers, all these categories we've looked at. So who's the best fit? Well, I put a bit of a number value, 1 through 4 in all these categories. If you led the category, you got 4 points. Of course, if you came in second, 3 points, then 2 points, and then 1 point. And try to tally it up that way to take a look at that. And then also include kind of the fuller picture of how these guys would look in an Orioles uniform. So coming up next, I try to make my final decision. With all this data, which of these 4 shortstops should the Orioles be prioritizing as free agent wish list at the very top this offseason? But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Simply Safe. And if you've thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Orioles listeners can order the #1 rated Simply Safe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. And here is why we love it at the Locked On Podcast Network. Simply Safe, well, they're really the best. They were named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report. That's the 3rd year in a row. And in an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get priority police response. And that 24/7 professional monitoring service, it costs less than $1 a day. And the top-rated Simply Safe app, you can stay in control of your entire system anytime, anywhere. You can arm, you can disarm, unlock it for a guest, access your cameras, or adjust system settings right from your phone. It's that easy. So don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system we recommend. Get 50% off any new Simply Safe system at simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like Simply Safe. So to finish things off here, I've talked through the offense, the defense, the speed, the contract numbers, the age, the overall total player with WAR, everything you could look at for the 4 available shortstops in free agency: Trea Turner, Dansby Swanson, Carlos Correa, and Xander Bogaerts. And with tallying up all of the categories, I came to the conclusion that the best fit for the Orioles is the guy who many thought was a great fit last offseason as well. And I think the best fit is Carlos Correa. Of course, the Orioles, according to one source that maybe didn't turn out to be that right, were somewhat connected to Correa when he was a free agent last offseason. Ended up signing a 3-year big money deal with the Minnesota Twins, but the deal had an opt-out after each of the first 2 seasons. And he exercised that opt-out this year, played 1 great season in Minnesota where he had the best offensive stats out of any of these 4 shortstops, and opted out to get even bigger money this offseason. And I'm sure the Twins are going to be pursuing him to bring him back on a long-term deal. I don't think the Astros are looking to bring him back, but there's a lot of teams out there who are looking for a shortstop. Maybe if the Dodgers don't re-sign Trea Turner, they could go after Carlos Correa. Obviously a team like the Twins is going to go after him. Maybe the Yankees, who really haven't filled that shortstop hole, would go after a guy like Carlos Correa. Maybe the Braves, if they don't re-sign Swanson, would go after him. There's a lot of different guys. Maybe the Phillies would look to upgrade that infield of, Gene Segura gone and maybe Bryson Stott moves over to second base. There's a whole lot of teams that are going to be going after not just Correa, but all 4 of these shortstops. So if the Orioles are involved in these talks with these free agents, they're going to need to be competitive and they're going to need to spend some money. But for Carlos Correa, because he's a little younger and you can, maybe get that longer term contract. And hey, maybe the Orioles don't have to give him those 9 years, but maybe you can go to 6 years or maybe 7 years. And hey, it might take $30 million a year, but if you can get it to somewhere where you can get him to accept, in the low 200 millions for 6-ish years, you go for it and you go get Carlos Correa. And yet people are going to say, oh, well, the value might be the best on Dansby Swanson. And he does have some good qualities, still some good defense. The power showed this year, but I just don't think he has the track record to give him that much money. And I love Trea Turner, and I think he could move to second. He gives you speed, and he's had those great last 2 seasons. But I don't know about the defense. And all the hitting categories, he swings and misses a lot more than these other 3 guys at times. So I don't know. And Xander Bogaerts, I love Xander Bogaerts as a hitter, but I think his defensive numbers, which got better this year, are kind of a mirage. They've been pretty bad his whole career. Plus, he's slow and he's already 30. He's the oldest of these four. Maybe he starts to break down and regress a lot earlier than the rest of these guys. If you're going for the stud that's going to hit the middle of your lineup and help this Orioles team, I think it's got to be Carlos Correa. But sound off in the comments here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. If you think it's one of the other four guys, let me know. Let me know why. But I kind of laid out all the stats right there, everything you need to look at. I think it's got to be Carlos Correa. If the O's are going to go after one of these four shortstops, Correa's got to be number one on their list. Hey, he's got the connection with Mike Elias, with the Astros. It's right there. It's go time. Let's do it. But a couple pieces of Orioles news and notes here before we get going on a Friday. The Orioles actually cleared up another spot on their 40-man roster. They outrighted Mark Colesberry off the 40-man. He was one of those two catchers that the Orioles claimed off waivers from the Reds a couple weeks ago. Colesberry, who played a few games in the big leagues in his debut with Cincinnati this year, didn't really hit, known as a better defensive catcher. But the Orioles, who had 6 catchers on the 40-man roster at one point, they are now back down to 1. Adley Rutschman is the only catcher on the 40-man roster. Colesberry, it looks like, will stay in the organization and go to AAA Norfolk and still will compete for Adley's backup job in spring training, but it does clear a 40-man roster spot. And speaking of Adley Rutschman, he got a couple of down-ballot MVP votes as the AL and NL MVPs were announced Thursday night. Of course, Paul Goldschmidt winning in the NL, and then Aaron Judge, unsurprisingly, winning the AL MVP unanimously. Adley Rutschman finished 12th in AL MVP voting. He got a 5th place vote, I believe a 7th place vote, and an 8th place vote from 3 different writers, which put him in 12th. Shout out to Adley Rutschman. Finished 2nd in Rookie of the Year, 12th in MVP. Not too shabby for your first year in the big leagues. I think things are going to get better and better, and I think he's going to win a legitimate MVP at some point in his career. But that'll do it for today. That'll do it for the week here on the podcast. We'll be back on Monday. It'll be a mailbag Monday, it looks like, on Monday. So send in your Orioles mailbag questions. I will answer them on Monday's episode. Of course, you can email us at lockedonorioles@gmail.com to get those questions in. You can leave a question right here in the YouTube comments under any of our videos. They will get answered. You can leave a question in the review section on Apple Podcasts. If you leave a 5-star rating and in the review section, just leave your question. It will get answered. And of course, you can tweet us your questions at Locked On Orioles or at Connor Newcomb _. The DMs are open for both accounts as well to get those questions in. What I will say is, it seems like at this point, Twitter is completely falling apart. So maybe don't rely on Twitter for those mailbag questions. Send them via email or YouTube comments, and I'll answer them coming up on a Mailbag Monday episode. Now, things could change. Maybe if the Orioles make a move over the weekend. Of course, I'll talk about that on Monday. But if not, it will be another mailbag episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.